Welcome back, my dear friends, to the Vatican Archive, with some of the best writing I've seen in a long, long time. So once again, you're in for a big treat this evening, my dear friends. And so it's once again time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. I'm placing my life at serious risk by posting this. The title alone, if given enough attention, will set forces in motion that would shatter the courage of even the bravest men. I'm a leaker, you see, and what I have to reveal has been ferociously guarded for centuries, and for good reason. The Catholic Church has an intricate and often sinister past. What you read in textbooks or watch on the news is only a minuscule fraction of the Vatican's vile history. Even historians, a profession which I am fortunate enough to call my own, hardly understand the scope and power of the papacy's influence. I know that I didn't. That is, until I stole a laptop from a high-ranking Catholic priest that has access to the Vatican's secret archives, and learned truths so staggering that they may have made me question everything I thought I knew about the Church's history. The public deserves access to the information in this archive. It is criminal that the Church has gotten away with concealing these valuable documents for so long. Don't believe the Vatican's recent transparency regarding this ancient knowledge. The Pope's digitization and disclosure efforts are nothing more than a sham. A thinly veiled masquerade designed to keep the public happy. The real insights that the archive has to offer will never see the light of day. They'll forever languish on dusty bookshelves and encrypted hard drives deep within the walls of Vatican City. Which is why I decided to act. I can't sit around while people are lied to, while history's most important documents are left to rot in the hands of peevish priests. As any self-respecting scholar would agree, information is power. And public information is the foundation which Western democracy is built upon. I should warn you, though, the information that I have to share will shake you to your core. Never before had I felt so frightened in all of my life than the first time I deep dived into the archive's darkest secrets. How I came by this information is a horror story all to its own, and one which I feel is necessary to share with you now. For maybe then you'll understand why I volunteered to venture on such a perilous crusade. I first arrived in Vatican City 2 weeks ago after securing my access card to the Vatican Library. Given the amount of qualifications and credentials required to utilize this library, receiving an access card is every researcher's dream. So, after checking into my hotel room, I sauntered through the towering columns and sprawling architecture of Rome until I reached the library. Words can hardly describe the joy I felt at the sight of St. Peter's Basilica and all of the other architectural marvels of the Western world. Thousands of pages of history books came to life before my waking eyes, transporting me back to the blissful hours I'd spent in my youth lounging in armchairs and private library rooms, daydreaming of strolling through the Vatican Palace. As I travelled through the sloping columns and freshly trimmed grass of the Belvedere courtyard, a middle-aged priest approached me. He was wearing the traditional black ecclesiastical dress of a cleric and had thin smile lines framing his lips. "Welcome to Vatican City," he said, caressing my hand. "I am Father Bernard, the man you've been corresponding with." "Thank you, Father," I said. "It's an honor to finally meet you. Vatican City must truly be welcoming of scholars if men of your stature are out in courtyards greeting simple historians." Father Bernard grinned. "It's no trouble at all. Walking the grounds is my favorite hobby. The sight of so much history never grows old. And besides, priests have step counters too." We both laughed. "If you will follow me," he continued, "I will lead you to the library. I'm sure you are anxious to begin your research." I followed him through the courtyard and past the sprawling double doors of the library. The moment my eyes fell upon the blessed manuscript lining the massive shelves, I started beaming like a child. "It's quite a marvel, isn't it?" said Father Bernard. "I remember the first time I passed through these doors. It's an experience unlike any other." "Yeah, it certainly is." Father Bernard chuckled and placed his hand on my shoulder. "I'll leave you to it. Remember to pace yourself. I know firsthand this library's allure. Countless scholars throughout the centuries have burned themselves out, pouring through its endless sea of scrolls. I'll try my best. I'm sure you will. He moved his hand from my shoulder and retreated toward the doors. Just as he was about to step back into the courtyard, he turned around and addressed me. How does getting dinner this evening sound? He said. Your research is fascinating. I would love to hear more about your work. And besides, I know where the real restaurants are in Rome. All of the establishments near Vatican City are catered towards tourists. Well, that sounds like an excellent idea, Father. Thank you. Wonderful. Meet you in the courtyard at 6. I found Father Bernard later that evening, lounging on a pillar in the middle of the courtyard. How did your research go? He said, smiling at me as I approached. Better than I could have imagined. The Vatican Library holds up to its reputation. I doubt any other library in the world contains as many primary sources about exorcism. You're probably right. Our documentation of the procedure is vast. I find the topic quite interesting myself, which is why I wanted to meet you. It's not every day I have the chance to meet one of the top exorcism experts in the United States. We started walking towards a cab he had waiting for us beyond the courtyard. You flatter me. I'm just a simple historian, nothing more. Don't sell yourself short. Your work on this subject is stunning. I just finished reading the article you wrote about exorcism practices in 17th century England, and I'm very impressed by it. Your attention to detail is astounding. You really brought those old records to life. I smiled as Father Bernard opened the cab door for me. Thank you, Father. I try my best. And it shows. He lowered himself into the cab beside me. Take us to La Villa, he said to the driver. We arrived at La Villa 10 minutes later and were given a cozy table on the patio, despite not having a reservation. One of the perks of being a Monsignor, said Father Bernard. I sat down and surveyed the panoramic view of Rome before me. In the distance I could see the towering dome of St. Peter's, which was backed by the cascading spires of Vatican City. The dome burned red with the setting sun, and reflected its warm hue onto the surrounding towers by basking the adjacent skyline in scintillating mists of light. Although we were at the fringe of the city, I could still hear the steady din of traffic and pedestrians below. A waiter approached us. Father Bernard addressed him in a steady torrent of Italian that quickly surpassed my limited understanding of the language. I hope you don't mind me ordering for you, he said. I find that it's easier that way. Not at all, I said. I can tell you know what you're doing. I've had some experience. Father Bernard filled our glasses with water from the pitcher the waiter had left on the table. So, tell me, he continued, how did you become interested in exorcism? Reading The Exorcist as a child, believe it or not. I became fascinated by Regan's descent into the abyss, and Father Karras' daring plunge to bring her back to the surface. The moment I finished the book, I knew that I wanted to learn everything I could about exorcism. The Exorcist is a great book. William Peter Blatty is one of my favorite authors. I flashed him a surprised look. You've read The Exorcist? Yes, like I told you earlier, my fascination with the subject matches your own. I read everything about the rite that I can get my hands on, including your work. That surprises me. I thought most priests viewed the practice as either a farce or archaic. Some do, yes, but most of us view exorcism as an integral part of the Church's history. It's our primary link with the forces of heaven and hell. Forgive me if I'm being too forward, Father, but I have to ask. Have you ever performed an exorcism yourself? Father Bernard leaned back in his chair and regarded me with dark eyes that reflected the light of the lantern swaying above our heads. I have, he said, many times. My heart rate increased. He was only the third priest I'd met admitting to having performed the rite. The Church preferred to keep the practice a secret, especially in a world dominated by science. what an experience it must be. I'd love to hear your stories. Maybe some other time. Instead, how about I perform one for you? When I saw the boy thrashing in his bed and baying like a donkey, I nearly backed out of the room. The child was obviously deranged. White foam spewed forth from his mouth in thick torrents and pooled on his emaciated chest, which was streaked with grime and shaking from his shallow breathing. His eyes rolled in his sockets like spinning discs as Father Bernard approached him. This poor child's name is Raphael, he said, placing his hand on the side of the bed. I've been performing exorcisms on him for a month now, but to no avail. I watched as Raphael's limbs pounded against the bed like overworking pistons. The leather straps confining him to the stained and sweat-drenched mattress shook violently under the force of his pulling. No amount of reading about possession could have prepared me for such a gruesome sight. Although Raphael was only a child, he looked evil, and had such a palpable look of disdain plastered onto his face that it threatened to strike the air from my lungs. "Will you be able to free him?" I said, forcing myself to take another step into the room. I didn't want Father Bernard to notice my fear. Witnessing him perform an exorcism was a monumental privilege. I didn't want him to regret bringing me to such a perilous task. "God willing, yes," he said. "The demon inside Raphael is vicious, but no more than the good Lord is righteous. I'm confident that in time I will be able to save him from the parasite that has attached itself to his soul." I watched as he pulled a copy of the Rituale Romanum from his pocket and thumbed open the yellowed pages. "Brace yourself," he said. "Raphael is a fighter. He bit off his mother's finger last week. If I were you, I wouldn't get any closer." As if on cue, Raphael reared back and spat onto the blanket clustered around his legs. Although his gesture filled me with disgust, curiosity drew my eyes to his saliva like a magnet does steel. Wedged within the phlegm and bile was a human fingernail. "Excusez-moi," said Raphael in a bogus French accent. He then started laughing as if he'd just made the funniest joke in the world. "Ignore him," said Father Bernard, voice nearly drowned out by Raphael's laughter. "He will do anything in his power to break your spirit. Remember, nothing he says is true." "I see you brought a friend this time, Father," said Raphael. "I guess this is as good a place to screw as any. I didn't know you liked an audience." Father Bernard pulled a cross from his pocket and clutched it tightly in his hand. "Your days of filling this child's mouth with blasphemies are numbered. I will draw you from his body like poison from a wound." "Are you sure that's a good idea? If I go, then so does the boy. The denizens of hell will dine on his soul for an eternity." "His soul belongs to God and nobody else." "Has he ever spoken English before?" I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. This task was difficult enough. Despite the decades I'd spent reading primary sources about possession, nothing could have prepared me for the sight of the filth-ridden boy writhing on the bed before me. His very presence oozed evil. I could feel it clogging my throat with each breath I took of the putrid air. "He has not. We normally speak Latin." Raphael snapped his eyes onto mine. The intensity of his gaze quickened my already elevated heart rate. "Here for a show, are you, Yankee? Tired of digging your nose in musty books?" "Do not respond to him," said Father Bernard. "His only goal is to torment you." I ignored Father Bernard's advice. If the boy was actually possessed, then I couldn't pass up the opportunity to speak with him. My scholarly nature wouldn't let me. I'd spent too many years researching possession to simply go mute in front of such a profound, albeit malicious, entity. And besides, the boy's bloodshot eyes were commanding me to speak. I had no more control over the words that flowed from my mouth than I did my own beating heart. "I'm here to help Father Bernard free the boy from your influence," I said. My voice was surprisingly strong given the fear reverberating throughout my body. "You're not welcome here. I glanced at Father Bernard, worried that I'd overstepped myself. He'd given me a direct order not to answer the boy, and there I was threatening to send his tormentor back to the abyss it had crawled from. Luckily, his face appeared amused rather than angry. "That's where you're wrong, Yankee," said Raphael. "I'm more welcome here than you are. You're just not wise enough to realize it yet." "What do you mean?" I said. Father Bernard interjected before Raphael had a chance to respond. "He is speaking nonsense," he said. "Pay him no mind. This is nothing but a distraction designed to delay me from performing the exorcism." He lowered his eyes, which glowed with intensity despite the room's low light, towards the ancient book clasped firmly in his hands. "Your time on this earth has come to an end, demon. God is this boy's master, not you. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to relinquish your hold on his spirit." And with that, Father Bernard began the exorcism. Passages from the Rituale Romanum spewed from his mouth like a roaring river and filled the room with thundering echoes. The cadence of his voice mesmerized me. His words were equally terrifying and beautiful. Although I couldn't understand the Latin spewing from his lips, especially given how quickly he was speaking, the power of his words filled every cell in my body with excitement. Never before or since had I felt so close to God. Father Bernard outstretched his cross, which he'd been clutching against the back cover of the book, and approached the bed. His voice increased in volume as he walked. By the time he was close enough to touch Raphael's struggling limbs, he was practically shouting. I resisted the urge to cover my ears. Despite the sadistic grin etched onto his face, I could see fear in Raphael's eyes. He no more wanted to be touched by the cross than I did by a surgeon's needle. It was in that moment I learned that even demons tremble in the presence of God. Raphael shied as far away from the cross as his straps would let him. The bed frame creaked from the force of his pulling. "Are you going to let him kill the boy, Yankee?" he said. "If he takes one more step, then I'm going to cast the boy to hell." "You will do no such thing," said Father Bernard. "The boy's soul belongs to God and God alone. You are nothing but a parasite designed to corrupt the weak and innocent. I will not stand for it. God will not stand for it." I watched as Father Bernard placed the cross onto Raphael's forehead. Raphael screamed the moment the metal struck his flesh, as if it were a red-hot cattle brand. His eyes rolled in their sockets with such pain and ferocity, I feared that they might pop out. "Relinquish your hold on this boy's spirit," said Father Bernard. "Your time violating his body and soul has come to an end. Return to your master." Raphael released such a guttural scream it made my hair stand on end. I imagined his vocal cords tearing thread by thread, and shuddered. Father Bernard resumed his recitation of the exorcism rites, all the while pressing the cross against Raphael's forehead as if he was trying to burrow it into his skin. The veins on his neck protruded from the force of his voice. I stood there, motionless, for an indeterminable amount of time as Father Bernard continued the exorcism, until eventually Raphael's body went slack. With a sigh of relief, Father Bernard removed the cross from his forehead and retreated from the bed. "It's done," he said. "It's finally done." We barely had time to catch our breaths before Raphael's eyes snapped back open. He then let out a laugh so sinister it sucked the light from the room. "You're wrong, priest. Our little dance is far from being over. The boy is mine. Not even God can save him." Father Bernard shut the door behind him as we passed into the hall, muffling Raphael's hysterical shrieks which were biting at our heels like a rabid dog. What happens to the boy now?" I said. "For the time being, nothing," said Father Bernard. "I will try another exorcism in a few days." I followed him into the living room. The boy's mother, Angela, hurried over to us the moment we exited the hall, face contorted with worry. Father Bernard said something to her in Italian, and then tears filled her eyes. "Poor woman," he said to me, following a brief conversation in which he tried to console her. She is at her wit's end. It's best we leave now so she and the boy can rest." With a final nod towards Angela, he exited the cottage. Just as I was about to follow him back to the car, Angela rushed towards me and placed a crumpled piece of parchment in my hand. I looked down at the parchment and found the following message scrawled hurriedly in broken English. "Don't trust the priest. He is not what he seems. Please, help us." I returned to Raphael and Angela's house early the next morning. The implications of Angela's note had prevented me from sleeping. Father Bernard seemed like a genuine man of God. My stomach turned at the thought that his righteousness might be a facade. Was he truly capable of harming a child? Based on the exorcism I'd witnessed, he was doing everything in his power to save the boy, not condemn him. Still, there was always the possibility that yesterday's events could have been an act, a ruse designed to mask a motive so sinister that even my own active mind couldn't deduce it. "I am more welcome here than you are. You're just not wise enough to realize it yet." Raphael's words sounded in my mind as I approached the door. At the time I'd taken this warning as an attempt by his tormentor to frighten me, but now I doubted the veracity of this impression. Given the content of Angela's note, the demon's words might have been a genuine taunt. The thought that Father Bernard might be in league with the forces of hell made my blood run cold. When I arrived at the door, I knocked a few times and then placed my hands in my pockets. A cold front had descended over Rome during the night, bringing with it thick mists and grey skies. The early hour only intensified this cold. I could already feel redness rising in my cheeks, and cursed myself for not packing a proper hat. Angela swung open the door a few moments later. Her hair was wild and her eyes were red and puffy, as if she'd been crying. "Thank goodness you've come," she said. "I was worried you might ignore my note. Please, come inside." I followed her into the living room. "I apologize for not coming sooner," I said. I had difficulties giving the cab driver directions to your house. I'm still new to the city." "There's no need to apologize. I'm happy that you came at all. I was up all night wondering if you would show my note to Father Bernard. Given that it's you standing in my living room and not him, I suspect that he doesn't know you're here." "I haven't spoken to Father Bernard since yesterday evening." "So he knows nothing of my note?" "Yes." Angela's shoulders straightened as a wave of stress visibly rolled off her body. "I appreciate your secrecy. Your presence means more than you will ever know." "It's not a problem, although I can assure you, Father Bernard is a good man. You shouldn't have any reason to fear him. He's been nothing but kind to me since I arrived in Rome." "You only say that because you don't know what he's capable of. His kindness is only an act. Il suo male non conosce confine. His evil knows no boundaries." "What do you mean?" Angela sighed and ran her fingers through her graying hair. "He's a bad priest, one of the worst in the city, and that's saying a lot." She paused and locked the door behind us. Then she followed me into the living room. "I'm getting ahead of myself, though. I haven't even offered you anything to drink. Please, take a seat by the fire. I'm sure you're cold." "Thank you." I walked across the room and sat in the rustic armchair beside the fireplace. Pleasure washed over my body as heat bathed my skin. Angela's cottage was simple and well kept. A beautiful tapestry of the Virgin Mary hung above the fireplace, and the walls were dotted with crosses. On the wooden shelf across from me sat a portrait of Raphael. "Care for some coffee?" asked Angela. "Yes, please." "One moment." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few moments later holding a steaming cup. "Thank you," I said, grabbing the cup. "I'm afraid that I don't have any sugar," she said, sitting down in a nearby chair. "But I added some milk. Is it hot enough?" "It's wonderful. Thank you, Angela." A scream sounded from Raphael's room. The scream was followed by the pounding of wood and creaking of floorboards as Raphael struggled against the straps binding him to the bed frame.
"Oh, that poor child," said Angela, glancing towards the room. "He's been through so much pain this month."
"So you think he's truly—" My voice trailed off. I couldn't force myself to say the word, especially to the boy's mother.
"Possessed. Absolutely. There's no other explanation for his symptoms."
"When did his symptoms first arise?"
"After we met Father Bernard."
I lowered my cup, which was raised halfway to my mouth, to the end table beside me.
"I don't understand. Isn't Father Bernard trying to save him?"
Angela let out a distressed laugh.
"That couldn't be any further from the truth. He's the one that tainted Raphael's soul."
"What do you mean?"
"Ever since Father Bernard entered our lives, Raphael's affliction has only gotten worse. Like I told you, he's a bad priest, like so many other priests in this cursed city."
Now, let me make sure I'm understanding you properly. You're saying that Father Bernard is the reason your son is possessed?
"Yes."
I flashed Angela a concerned look.
"Oh, you can't seriously believe that. The man's a Monsignor, for Christ's sake." "I know it sounds crazy, but I can assure you, Father Bernard is not the man you think he is. He's evil and he's ruining my son's life."
She placed a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob.
"Oh, Raphael is a good boy. He doesn't deserve this fate. He's not the only innocent soul being tainted by the church, though. There are whispers of possession cases just like his popping up all over the city. Everybody knows that the church is responsible, but nobody has the power to do anything about it. The church controls everything around here, from the police to the politicians."
"Well, if that's the case, then what good can I do you? From what you're saying, the police can't even help him."
"You're a foreigner, which means you're not corrupted by the Vatican's influence. Take Raphael back to America with you, please. He'll be safer in your country. What you do with him when you get there is up to you. Drop him off at an orphanage if it suits you. Just rescue him, please, from the priest. I beg you."
Angela's tears, which had been slowly building throughout our conversation, began to fall full force.
"Look, I want to help you, Angela, but what you're saying is impossible. I would never be able to get him past customs, and that's not even taking into consideration his condition. Bringing him with me would do him more harm than good." "You don't know that. I'm sure you can find a way to smuggle him into America if you think long enough. I'll give you all the money that I have. It's not much, but it's more than enough to pay for his keep."
"I'm sorry, Angela. I can't do it." Raphael screamed so loud that it made both of us jump in our seats.
"Do you mind if I go and check on him?"
I said.
"Not at all," said Angela, wiping away her tears. "That's very kind of you."
I walked towards the hallway beside the kitchen. Raphael's room was at the end of this hallway, and I approached the weathered wooden door on silent feet and turned the doorknob. The moment I entered the room, I nearly vomited. Never before had I encountered such a foul smell. I felt like I'd walked into a room filled with spoiled meat and raised my shirt above my nose. I glanced down at Raphael. Even though the boy appeared to be asleep, his limbs writhed every few moments, as if he were covered in ants. Bed sores lined his entire body, and his wrists and ankles were severely bruised from his straps. In short, he looked like a living corpse.
"Oh, you poor child,"
I said under my breath. I lowered my shirt and approached the bed. Pity filled me as I stared down at the child's emaciated frame. So moved was I by emotion that for a moment I considered agreeing to Angela's plan. Deep down, though, I knew that this plan was impossible, and mourned the terrible situation that Raphael had been dealt. Just as I was about to return to the living room, I heard a loud knock drift in from the entryway. Angela raced through the door a few seconds later, face pale.
"It's Father Bernard," she said, voice rushed. "You need to hide, quickly." I hurried over to the closet on the other side of the room, moving as quietly as possible to avoid waking Raphael. The last thing I needed was for the child to regain consciousness and betray my presence to Father Bernard. For all I knew, they might be working together, although for what purpose I shuddered to think. I shut the door behind me and listened as Angela welcomed Father Bernard into the house. Her voice was pleasant, but the fake kind of pleasant that betrayed her as a hostage. Never before had I felt so sorry for another human being. She'd been thrown into the lion's den and was powerless to save herself. All she could do was bide her time and hope that her situation improved before it swallowed her whole. My sorrow only intensified as I glanced at Raphael through the slats on the door. The boy was even more innocent than his mother. His possessed state had all but ruined his body, and I prayed that he be freed from his tormentor before his soul followed suit. A steady wave of Italian graced my ears as they conversed in the living room. Despite not being fluent in the language, I identified enough phrases to know that they were talking about Raphael. Father Bernard wanted to see him. He said that they had unfinished business. A pair of heavy footsteps sounded in the hall. My heart rate increased as they got closer, then nearly doubled when Father Bernard passed into the room. He paused near the doorway for a few moments, glaring at Raphael, before approaching the bed. "Wake up," he said, kicking the bed frame. Raphael's eyes flew open. Even from across the room I could see how bloodshot and milky they were. Given the abysmal state of his corneas, it amazed me that he wasn't blind. "Back so soon, Father," said Raphael. "I see you came alone this time. Where's your friend? Did he already get tired of screwing you?" "Enough. I don't have time for your taunts. You're going to give me what I want this time, or I swear to God I will send you back to hell." "Oh, you act like this is such a threat. Remember, priest, hell is my home." "Don't pretend like you wouldn't prefer to stay inside the boy. Your enthusiasm for his flesh betrays your true desire. The boy is a trinket to me, and nothing more. You seem to forget that you are the one who placed me inside him. I was perfectly content with my existence before you conjured me." Father Bernard flashed him a disdainful look. "That's a lie. We both know that I did you a favor. Don't try to hide it." "It is I that is positioned to do the favors. You have nothing to offer me, priest, and yet I have everything to offer you. The secrets of heaven and hell are at my fingertips. If I didn't like seeing you sweat so much, I might be tempted to give you the knowledge that you seek." Raphael wrapped his hands around his straps and grinned. "As it stands, I think I will stay mum on the subject. The suffering your burning curiosity causes is too palpable. I can practically smell it in the air. I want to savor it." Father Bernard pounded his fists on the mattress so hard the floor creaked. "I summons you, demon. I command you to answer me." "Life isn't a Faustus legend, Bernard. You can't command me to do anything." "I've wasted enough time on you. Coming here again so soon was a mistake. Hell is overflowing with twisted souls and deviant entities desperate for flesh. I'm sure I can find one who is willing to give me the knowledge that I desire." Before Raphael could respond, Father Bernard pulled the Rituale Romanum from his pocket and launched into another exorcism. His words echoed around the room with insidious clarity and shook the door concealing me with their power. As the exorcism wore on, Raphael began to laugh. Father Bernard's words were affecting him no more than the flies buzzing around his fetid mouth. In fact, he was even enjoying the priest's performance of the ancient rite, as if he were sitting front row to his favorite play. Eventually, Raphael's laughter grew so loud that Father Bernard gave up the exorcism and threw the Rituale Romanum to the floor. "That's it," he said. "If I can't sever your presence from the boy's flesh, then I will send the boy stinking into the earth." I watched in horror as Father Bernard leapt onto the bed and wrapped his hands around Raphael's throat. The veins protruded from his neck as he squeezed with all of his might. Every atom of my being was telling me to intervene, but fear rooted my feet to the floor. I'd fallen entirely into shock. Never could I have imagined a priest behaving so heinously. Raphael let out a gurgling sound and flailed his limbs. His struggles were pointless, though. The straps binding his feet and hands were too powerful for him to retaliate. All he could do was lay there, sputtering, as Father Bernard constricted the life from his body. A few seconds later, Raphael kicked his legs a final time, and then fell still. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by Father Bernard's labored breathing. Just as he was lowering himself from the child's lifeless body, Angela came barreling through the door. The commotion, followed by its immediate cessation, must have alerted her to the horrors taking place. She screamed in despair at the sight of her son's corpse. This despair soon morphed into rage as she regarded Father Bernard. "How dare you touch him?" she said in Italian, voice hoarse with anger and sorrow. "How dare you tear this family apart?" "Remember your place," said Father Bernard, also in Italian. "What just transpired is none of your concern. It is between me and God." "Even now you evoke God's name. After what you have just done, you are a monster. You don't deserve to live." Angela threw herself at him, snarling and screaming like a wounded animal. She crashed into him with such force that she sent him tumbling back onto the bed. She then started pounding him with as much strength as her tiny fists could muster. Father Bernard's initial shock from attack didn't last long. Within moments his hands found her throat, and he throttled the life from her lungs even quicker than he had Raphael's. The murder was complete before I'd hardly had time to react. Regardless, I cursed myself for my cowardice. The burden I bear for not assisting such a kind and innocent family haunts me to this day. I watched in a dazed stupor as Father Bernard dragged their bodies from the room and soon disappeared from the house. What haunts me even more about that day, though, is a small detail that I didn't notice until later that night. When this realization finally struck me, I nearly fainted from its implications. The demon inside Raphael had chosen to speak English. It had been aware of my presence and wanted me to understand its conversation with Father Bernard. It had wanted me to learn. Witnessing Father Bernard murder Raphael and Angela in cold blood affected me so profoundly I spent the next morning languishing in my hotel room, curtains drawn. I felt like I'd aged 10 years. Dark-colored bags framed my eyes and stress lines dominated my forehead. My entire body ached with nervous energy. At any moment I feared that Father Bernard might come crashing through the door, pale hands outstretched and threatening to tumult me into the abyss. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't banish the memory of Raphael and Angela's lifeless bodies from my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, their swollen throats and bulging eyes sabotaged my awareness. Guilt for leaving them to their fates haunted my every breath. I cursed myself for doing nothing to save them, and wished that it was myself that Father Bernard had throttled to oblivion instead of such a sweet and innocent family. In the rare moments that I wasn't crippled by guilt, my mind swam with questions. What information was Father Bernard after, and why was he using such despicable means to obtain it? The answer to these questions eluded me, despite my best efforts to deduce them. All I knew was that whatever he was after, he would stop at nothing to get it. Even more pressing was the question of why Raphael had chosen to keep my presence hidden from Father Bernard. The entity had obviously wanted me to witness the wayward priest's true behavior. But why? Had it simply been toying with me, or did it expect me to act on such a terrifying revelation? Questions surrounding the demon's motivation tormented my every breath and burned my mind with uncertainties. I desperately wished that I could report the matter to the police and be done with it. Given my conversation with Angela, though, I knew such an easy solution was impossible. Stopping Father Bernard was my burden to bear, whether I liked it or not. As the day wore on and my anxiety increased, I decided to return to the Vatican Library. Continuing my research, I was compiling an anthology of primary source documents about exorcism, would hopefully clear my head. So I donned my coat and entered the brisk Tuscan air. When I arrived at the library, I was surprised to find it practically empty. Less than a dozen scholars were milling about the shelves, and even fewer were sitting at the tables interspersed near the library's rear. Pleased with the solitude I was about to enjoy, I selected a manuscript detailing an exorcism that had taken place in Paris in the 30s, sat down and began to read. Before I'd even finished the first page, I heard a chair rustle directly to my right. I looked up and nearly jumped when I saw Father Bernard sitting down next to me. "I thought that I might find you here," he said, straightening his collar. "I neglected to ask you which hotel you are staying at." His sudden appearance filled me with dread, but I somehow managed to keep my wits and respond. "Hello, Father," I said. "What a pleasant surprise." "The pleasure's all mine. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. I always have time for a friend." "Excellent." Father Bernard paused and crossed his arms on the table. "There is some news that I've been meaning to share with you," he continued, "and it's rather tragic, I'm afraid." "What is it?" "Angela and Raphael are dead." I feigned a look of surprise. "Dead? How?" "They were murdered last night in their home. The police are there investigating now. So far, they don't have any leads. The crime appears to be random, which is not surprising given the current state of the city. My guess is it was a petty burglary gone wrong. It happens all the time." "Oh, that's terrible, especially after everything you've done to help them. Well, it's a shame that you weren't able to save the boy." "I agree. The situation is tragic. I would hang the criminal myself if I wasn't a man of the cloth." "Well, as would I." Father Bernard nodded and tapped his fingers against the table. "Have you eaten dinner yet?" "I haven't." "Neither have I. What do you say we return to my room? I've got some pasta I can prepare." "I don't know, Father. I'm feeling rather tired. I was thinking of returning to my hotel room and going to bed early this evening." "Nonsense. No friend of mine will go to bed on an empty stomach. And besides, I've been dying to ask you about your research. I've been dwelling on several questions regarding exorcism for quite some time now, and I'm hoping that you might have the answers." Father Bernard's chamber was simple and surprisingly well put together. Shelves of books lined the walls, and as did portraits of Jesus and the Virgin Mary. The only object tying the apartment to the present day was a laptop resting on a mahogany desk in the center of the room. If it wasn't for this simple piece of technology, the apartment could have been pulled straight from the Middle Ages. "It is not much, but it's home," said Father Bernard, passing into the kitchen. "Please find a seat at the table. The pasta will be ready shortly." I sat down at the table in the kitchenette and forced a smile when Father Bernard appeared a few minutes later carrying a steaming bowl of pasta. "Just like my mother used to make it," he said, spooning me a bowl. We began our meal in silence. Although my mind was too preoccupied to give much attention to the pasta, I had to admit the dish was excellent. "So, tell me," said Father Bernard between bites of pasta, "during your studies, have you ever come across an inversione di fortuna?" "I have not," I said. Father Bernard's face noticeably fell. "That's unfortunate. In English, inversione di fortuna roughly translates to reversal of fortune and refers to the act of summoning spirits and placing them in human hosts. There was a half-dozen or so priests who experimented with the ritual during the Inquisition, and possibly even before, to punish enemies of the church." My heart quickened. "Interesting. I'm surprised I've never heard of it." "Well, I'm not, although I was hoping that you would have stumbled across at least some account of the rite during your extensive research. Records of the procedure are rare. The only information I've been able to find is with the Apostolic Archive, or the Secret Archive, as the public loves to refer to it as." "You have access to the Apostolic Archive?" "Yes. Very few of us do. The Pope likes to keep the documents under wraps, even from priests. Even though most of the archive has been digitized, the Pope still keeps access limited. I remembered the laptop sitting in the living room, and my heart quickened even more. Wow, what a privilege it must be to have access to the Apostolic Archive. I can't imagine the insight those documents provide into the dealings of the Church. You're right. You can't imagine it. Nobody can. I'm a priest, and even I was floored by the information in the archive. Well, I have to ask. Your interest in this Inversione di Fortuna, right, intrigues me. How did this interest begin? Father Bernard was silent for a few moments. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. My love for the Bible, he said. Ever since I was a child, I have been fascinated by the titans of the Church depicted in that book. Peter, Paul, David, Mary, Joseph, Jesus, all devout followers of God who have been shining examples of the Christian faith throughout the ages. I've always wondered what it would be like to talk to these saints. What insights they could give into the metaphysics of heaven and hell. Given the immense span of time separating my life from theirs, though, these conversations are impossible. Regardless, I keep asking myself, what if there was a way to communicate with them? What if I could learn the secrets of heaven and hell, despite my imprisonment on earth? That's where my fascination with the Inversione di Fortuna rite began. Although the procedure has only been successfully used to conjure demons, what if it can be used instead to summon angels? What if by the simple twisting of a phrase we could replace a soul with poles instead of varlex? Can you imagine how much of a gift that would be? A loud thud sounded from the bedroom, cutting off his words. One moment, said Father Bernard, rising from his feet. I think that something must have... The bedroom door swung open and crashed against the wall, freezing the words in his throat. Standing in the hallway were Raphael and Angela, flesh pale and throat swollen. Their hair was wild and unkempt, and their clothes were covered in blood. Behind them lay an overturned bed, revealing an open trapdoor leading into the floor. I reared back from my chair and stumbled towards the living room. Angela and Raphael's sudden appearance shocked me beyond words. They were supposed to be dead. I'd watched their eyes go dark and their bodies go limp. And yet they were there, standing in the doorway, bodies pale and twisted, but very much alive. This is impossible, said Father Bernard, rising so quickly from his chair that it went plummet into the ground. I had you both secure. Your chains are weak, Father, said Angela. Her voice was morphed beyond recognition. Did you really think they would hold us forever? Not even God is that powerful. We refuse to rot in your cellar, said Raphael. If you truly want to learn the secrets of hell, then you can find them out for yourself. Hell always has room for one more soul, especially a priest's. They sprinted into the dining room and tackled Father Bernard to the ground. Bernard screamed as they sank their teeth into his skin. I watched in stunned silence as they eviscerated his flesh like rabid animals. Blood poured down his arms and legs in velvet streams. Soon his black tunic turned a deep red and adhered to his body like a new layer of flesh. No matter how badly my desire to flee from the apartment raged, my feet remained glued to the floor. I felt like a child who had just snuck into their first horror film. My eyes were transfixed by the frightening scene in front of me. I couldn't look away even if I tried. With a roar that caused the hair on the back of my neck to raise, Father Bernard plunged his hand into his pocket. He dug around for a few moments, body twisting as he tried to break free from his assailants, before producing a glass vial. In the name of God, my Father, he bellowed, spinning open the cap with surprising dexterity, I command you to release me. He poured the contents of the vial directly into Raphael and Angela's faces. They screamed in pain as the liquid doused their skin and went scrambling to their feet. Despite my hatred for Father Bernard, I had to give it to him. Using his holy water as a weapon was a clever move. Not only did it send Raphael and Angela careening towards the blood-spattered wall, but it bought him time to rise to his feet and grab a crucifix from a nearby shelf. Raphael and Angela's skin blistered as the water cascaded first down their foreheads and then their cheeks. Smoke emanated from their pores and filled the room with a sulfuric smell that tickled my nose. Although I didn't think it possible, their eyes turned an even deeper red. I watched as Father Bernard took a step towards them, half-empty vial raised. "Return to the cellar," he said, "or I will melt the flesh from your bones." Raphael stared at him for a few moments, blistering skin oozing pus, then let out a laugh that echoed around the apartment with unnatural volume. "We have spent an eternity without flesh," he said. "Go ahead and melt it." Just as Father Bernard was raising his leg to take another step forward, the lights went out. The apartment plunged into such a heavy darkness that I could hardly see my hand in front of my face. All I could hear was the sound of Raphael and Angela's raspy breathing. "You cannot defeat us, priest," said Angela. Based on the sound of her voice, I could tell that she'd retreated deeper into the room. "We're too powerful, and besides, your faith is twisted. God despises corrupt priests. He will not aid you." "First, we will kill you," said Raphael, a voice drifting in from the kitchen. "Then we will incinerate this blasted palace. The Vatican has been crumbling for centuries. It's time that somebody eased it into the ground." "You will do no such thing," said Father Bernard. Despite the power in his voice, I could also sense his fear. The situation was quickly spinning out of his control. "I'm not done with you yet. Only after you give me the information that I seek will you be set free. Until then, both of you are mine to do with as I please." I heard the whispering of feet upon the carpet. I gritted my teeth in anticipation of the end, then let out a sigh of relief when a candle came bursting to life beside me, revealing Father Bernard at my side instead of Raphael or Angela. "Stay close," said the priest. "The hatred from humankind doesn't discriminate. Although they're mainly after me, they will not hesitate to kill you either." I nodded. Despite my reservations about Father Bernard, I knew that I needed his help in order to escape from the apartment with my life. I was no more equipped to battle the forces of hell than a Boy Scout is to survive a month in the Amazon. I was entirely out of my element. Books were my element, and dusty archives, not battling the possessed. "So, what's the plan?" I said. "Place our faith in God and pray that He gets us out of this mess alive." He raised his candle and crucifix and started walking towards the living room. The apartment had fallen entirely silent. Raphael and Angela could be anywhere, from behind the couch to underneath the bed. It was then that I realized just how much of a disadvantage we were at. They could pounce on us at any moment, and we'd be powerless to stop them. We were weaponless. Other than Father Bernard's crucifix and holy water, we had no defenses. I followed Father Bernard into the living room. The light of the candle turned the room a pale orange and cast deep shadows that shook with the dancing flame. I imagined Angela's eyes stroking my flesh through the darkness, and resisted the urge to tremble. My eyes locked onto the laptop resting on the table in the corner. What kind of secrets were housed inside that delicate machine? The legends of the Apostolic Archive filled my mind and burned my body with curiosity, despite my perilous situation. Oh, if I only had access to that archive, then I could uncover not only Father Bernard's malicious motivations, but the secrets that the Church had been concealing for centuries. I wondered, for how long had priests like Father Bernard been allowed to wreak havoc on communities unpunished? For how long had the Church been serving faithful Catholics, only to turn around and abuse them for diabolical reasons that I was, as of yet, too ignorant to discern? My skin crawled at the thought of the documents housed in the secret archive. I just had to know what kind of dark activities the Church was up to, making it possible for the perverse priests like Father Bernard to rise so quickly through the ranks. It was in that moment that I first became aware of my purpose. Somebody needed to expose the church for what it really was, or priests like Father Bernard would continue preying on families for decades to come. I couldn't let that happen. I vowed to steal the laptop the first chance I got. The sound of shattering glass boomed from the kitchen, jolting my eyes away from the laptop. "Show yourselves," said Father Bernard, raising his crucifix. The metal glowed with the light of the candle in his other hand, as if it were made of glass. Bernard's command was met by whispered laughter, which echoed unnaturally around the apartment like ricocheting bat shrieks. "Give us the priest, and we'll set you free," said Raphael from some unseen place in the apartment. Based on the proximity of his voice, it sounded like he was on the ceiling. Thought of Raphael lurking in the shadows above my head, bloodshot eyes tracking me in the darkness, constricted my lungs. For a moment I actually considered accepting Raphael's offer. Father Bernard deserved to die. His evil was not only a plague on the city, but the Catholic faith that I cherished so dearly. And besides, watching Raphael tear out his throat would be a satisfying slice of situational irony. Father Bernard had damned the boy's soul to hell, so why shouldn't the boy get to do the same? Why not let him enact justice, Hammurabi style, on the priest's unsuspecting flesh? That I considered facilitating such a heinous act, even for a moment, filled me with shame. How could I let fear, no matter how palpable, mutilate the ethics of my faith? If the situation would have allowed it, I would have supplicated myself below the portrait of Jesus Christ to my right and begged for forgiveness until my throat turned raw. As it stood, I only had my guilt to show for my penance, which I offered up to the Lord like the ancient goat sacrifices of the Hittites. Father Bernard must have sensed my temptation and my subsequent guilt, for he smiled at me wanly through the shadows blanketing his face like a thick mist, as if he were forgiving me for thinking of throwing him to the wolves. "Consider my proposition wisely," said Raphael. "Remember, I'm the one who revealed the priest's true nature to you. I could have announced your presence yesterday as you hid in the closet, but I wanted you to witness the perversion of your faith. Our goal is the same. We both want to overturn this decaying sepulchre that is Catholicism, starting with the sadistic priest standing beside you now." Father Bernard snapped his piercing eyes onto mine. "What is he talking about?" he said. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. No matter how hard I tried to think of a response, I didn't know what to say. I felt my mouth had been wired shut, and stood there silently beside Father Bernard like a frightened mute. Luckily, Angela's voice broke the silence that had descended over the apartment, saving me from having to speak. "My companion is too merciful," she said. Her hoarse voice assaulted my ears with dagger-like stabs. "I will kill you both. Then I will send your souls plummeting into the darkest pits of hell." I watched in horror as Angela suddenly lowered from the ceiling. The air surrounding her decayed body morphed as she moved, as if she were bending the very fabric of space-time. I didn't have long to contemplate this strange phenomenon, though, for she lunged at us with such speed that my eyes hardly registered her movements. She crashed into our bodies and sent us hurtling towards the floor. The air flew from my lungs as my sternum struck the ground. I tried to sit up so I could catch my breath, but Angela leapt upon my back before I'd had the chance to even take a single labored breath. With a scream so piercing it nearly exploded my eardrums, Angela sunk her cold fingers into my hair and started pounding my head into the ground. My eyes filled with stars as my forehead continuously struck the floor like an oversized hammer, and my stomach rolled with nausea from the vertigo caused by my concussed brain. Despite the vitriolic mixture of pain and fear circumventing my body, I started laughing. My laugh morphed into a croak as my jaw loosened from the pounding, but my mirth remained. To think that Angela, of all people, the woman who'd begged me to help her only a day ago, would be the one to murder me was hilarious. Kindness and fragility were her dominating characteristics, and there she was trying to explode my skull on the carpet. The entire incident reeked of humor, Even I found it funny, and I was moments away from blacking out. But then I remembered Angela's violent death, and the invader that now reanimated her body, and my laughter stopped. "Release him," said Father Bernard from somewhere to my left. I heard the pounding of feet across the carpet, followed by the splattering of water. Angela screamed moments later, released my hair, and went careening towards the kitchen. Father Bernard had doused her with what remained of the holy water. If I wouldn't have been so focused on regaining my breath, I would have smirked at the sight of her smoking skin. "Get up," said Father Bernard. He grabbed my shoulders and hoisted me to my feet. He then grabbed another crucifix from the wall and placed it in my hand. "You're going to need this. It's time you start defending yourself. Besides, I need your help if we're going to escape with our lives." I wrapped my fingers around the crucifix and nodded my head. "Lead the way," I said. Father Bernard started creeping towards the kitchen, candle and crucifix raised in front of him like sword and shield. I followed him closely, clutching my newfound weapon so tightly my knuckles ached. I could hear Angela flailing inside the kitchen like a wounded bear. Father Bernard's holy water had splashed directly into her face. God, I imagined her eyes dangling from her sockets like cracked eggs, and shuddered. We had her on the ropes. All we needed to do now was give her one final push to send her plummeting back to hell, with Raphael soon to follow. Father Bernard's candle illuminated the kitchen, highlighting Angela writhing on the ground like a fish out of water, face half melted by the holy water. Her eyes had entirely dissolved, revealing dark, desolate sockets that consumed the light of the candle like a black hole. The skin on her nose and cheeks laid in tatters on the floor around her. Where once her face had been slender and beautiful, it was now gnarled and crooked, with nothing but exposed tendons and blackened flesh to remind those who dared gaze upon her of her once captivating beauty. We paused next to the pitiful corpse and stared down at it with contempt, mind silent and debating how to put it out of its misery. "We'll finish her off," said Father Bernard. He raised his crucifix in preparation to strike. Just as he was about to bring the cross down onto her ever-disintegrating head, Raphael leapt from the shadows, eyes wild, and wrapped his hands around Father Bernard's throat. "Don't you dare touch her," said Raphael. He squeezed his fingers so hard around Father Bernard's neck, the priest's eyes bulged. Their shoes skidded across the linoleum as they struggled for power over one another. Occasionally one of their feet would land on Angela, snapping a finger or cracking a rib. Bernard's face turned a sickly purple. Several of the vessels in his eyes popped from the pressure being exerted on his skull, filling his eyes with blood. Just as I feared that he might suffocate, he reared back with all of his strength and plunged his crucifix onto Raphael's forehead. Smoke billowed off of the child's skin as the metal cross burrowed into his flesh. Much to my horror, Father Bernard's valiant effort only angered Raphael more, and caused the possessed child to tighten his fingers around the priest's throat. Raphael screamed in pain as his charred flesh tumbled onto his sunken chest, but he still refused to release his prey. He was like a cornered viper. I could tell he would do anything in his power to claim his kill. Soon all that remained of his forehead was the withered, bloody crown of his skull, which reflected the light of the candle rolling along the ground in flashes of black and crimson. "Help me," stammered Father Bernard, drawing upon what little oxygen remained in his lungs to address me. He repositioned his crucifix onto Raphael's cheek and closed his eyes as a fresh wave of smoke washed over his face. Father Bernard's words sprung me into action. I leapt over Angela's writhing legs and tackled Raphael to the ground. The child's ribs cracked as my full weight landed on top of him. Pain and confusion overtook his bloodshot eyes as the stringy remains of his blackened cheek went tumbling into his mouth. I watched from my place on the ground as Bernard stumbled, wheezing heavily, towards the dining room table. After pausing for a moment to clear his sweat-drenched eyes, he picked up the porcelain bowl that contained the pasta we'd eaten for dinner and scrambled back into the kitchen. "Back away from him," he said, raising the bowl above his head. I leapt off Raphael's chest just as Father Bernard pummeled the base of the bowl into the demon's face. Raphael's limbs flailed from the force of the blow. I watched as a fracture spread across his exposed skull like an earthquake fault line, and I cringed. What happened next, I do not have the heart to write. Suffice it to say that blood, pasta, and bits of skull soon covered the entirety of the floor, and both Raphael and Angela's bodies, which had been used for purposes so vile I shudder even now, were finally allowed to enter their eternal slumbers. May God have mercy on their souls. "The deed is done," said Father Bernard. He released his grip on the bowl and sent it clattering onto the filth-laden ground. I averted my gaze from the mess below me. The copper scent of blood filled my nose, triggering my gag reflex. "You are in shock," said Father Bernard. "I've got something that will help you." He disappeared into the bathroom inside the master bedroom, then returned a few moments later carrying a glass filled with a dark liquid. "Drink it," he said. "It will make you feel better." I grabbed the glass from his hand. "What is it?" I said. "Medicine." If my mind hadn't been reeling from the horrors that had just taken place, I would have questioned him further. Given the intense fear numbing my reason, though, I simply nodded and downed the liquid. Within moments, my vision grew blurry. I stumbled into the living room, and then went crashing to the ground. The last thing I saw before falling unconscious was Father Bernard leaning over me, eyes filled with hatred. I awoke an indeterminable amount of time later in a dark room. I tried to move my arms, but the sound of rustling chains greeted my ears. It was then I realized my limbs were bound to the wall. I couldn't move any more than 6 inches before my chains locked into place. Panic filled my lungs as I darted my sightless eyes across the chamber. No matter how hard I strained my pupils, though, I couldn't make out anything in the darkness. My senses were completely nullified. I could hardly tell up from down. My throat was still sticky from the liquid that I'd consumed earlier. God, I chastised myself for falling for Bernard's ruse. How could I be so stupid to accept anything the priest gave me, much less a strange liquid? To think I'd come so far only to make such a careless mistake made my blood boil. I'd been so close to stealing the laptop, to finding out not only what sick plans were driving Father Bernard, but the entire church. Now I would die in this demented chamber, lonely and forgotten. The clanking of my chains must have alerted Bernard, for a trapdoor opened to my right moments later, flooding the room with light. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I let out a terrified scream. Chained to the walls around me were a dozen corpses. All were in varying stages of decomposition, and slumped against their chains like fetid ragdolls. Bizarre symbols covered their naked flesh, which were caked with dry blood and looked so evil that they stole the air from my throat. I heard the thudding of feet on the wooden ladder that descended into the chamber, and turned my head just in time to see Bernard reach the ground. "It's about time you woke up," he said. "For a while I was wondering if I'd accidentally killed you." He strode over to me and paused 2 feet away from my face. All of the gore that had been plastered to his clothes and skin had been washed away. He must have showered and changed while I had been unconscious. I looked down at his hands and saw that he was carrying a book. "Why are you doing this to me?" I said. "What is this place?" "Oh, this is my temple. My private sanctuary in which I hold communion with God. All of my work, my true work, takes place in this chamber. These walls are sacred. When Jesus Christ returns to earth, he will be in this room. I can assure you of that." I tried my best to hide my incredulity, but I doubted that I did a good job, for Father Bernard's words were so bizarre that they frightened me even more than the corpses pinned to the walls. "You're delusional," I said, voice surprisingly strong. I'd feared that my distress would cause my voice to come out as little more than a croak.
Do you honestly believe what you're saying? Of course I do. And if you possess the knowledge that I possess, you wouldn't be asking me such a ridiculous question.
What knowledge?
The knowledge of the Apostolic Archive.
What do you mean? What knowledge has the power to influence someone to commit such horrible crimes?
You have no idea.
My hands trembled as Father Bernard's eyes bored into my own. Blood still filled his corneas from when Raphael had popped his blood vessels, making him look like a cadaver in the low light.
Why are you telling me this?
How do you know I won't reveal your secrets the moment I get the chance? Bernard let out a laugh that froze the marrow in my bones.
Reveal me to who? He said. The police? The press? The church runs both.
Good luck getting anybody to take your side over ours. My work has been going on for centuries, long before either you or I were born, and will continue for centuries more. I'm not the first priest to follow my particular line of inquiry, and I certainly won't be the last. Even if you could convince anybody that I've committed the horrible crimes that you say I have, though, it matters not. Your life is rapidly coming to a close. Any revelations that you have uncovered about myself or the church will follow you to your grave.
If killing me is your plan, then why'd you bring me down here? Why didn't you just slit my throat or pierce my heart while I was unconscious? Would have saved you a lot of trouble.
Father Bernard tightened his grip on the book.
I need your flesh. The inversione de fortuna rite works best while the subject is still alive. I can make use of corpses, yes, but the results are often unpredictable. I don't need another incident like what happened downstairs. How Raphael and Angela escaped from their chains, I do not know. All I know is that you won't be so fortunate.
He thumbed open the mysterious book to a yellowed page near the center.
Try not to look so bleak. You never know. With the adjustments I'm going to make to the wording this time, maybe St. Paul will commandeer your body instead of a Belial.
Before I had a chance to respond, he started reciting a passage from the book. Ancient Latin phrases reverberated around the chamber, sending my hair on edge. I felt like a pig being led to slaughter, but resisted the urge to scream. As Father Bernard continued reading the rites, I felt a tingling sensation ripple across my body. This tingling started in my toes and within moments had passed through my cranium. Never before had I felt so violated. I felt as if something alive was writhing underneath my skin. Before I knew it, my entire body was shaking, sending my chains exploding against the wall. Just as I feared that I might pass out, Bernard fell silent. He stared at me for a few moments, eyes gleaming in the light drifting down from the still-open trapdoor, before pulling a knife from his tunic. I grimaced as he cut away my shirt and began to carve symbols into my stomach. These symbols were archaic in shape. Never once did I come across them in my studies. Blood pooled around my feet as he continued lacerating my skin. Each slice was more painful than the last, and soon tears streaked my cheeks. When every inch of my torso was covered in these vile marks, he thumbed back open the book and continued reciting the rite. My shaking became exponentially more violent. White foam shot from my mouth like a shotgun and splattered Father Bernard's face. The priest simply wiped away the saliva and kept reading, as if my physiological reaction was the most normal thing in the world. Suddenly, and without warning, an alien presence exploded into my mind. This presence felt evil and filled me with such despair that soon a desire to slit my wrists had overtaken me. I sent up a desperate prayer to God to save me from such a horrible death, to keep the demonic entity slowly devouring my body from stealing my soul. Just as I was about to succumb to the vile presence infiltrating my spirit, a guttural scream sounded to my left, cutting off Bernard's words. The moment the priest's recitation stopped, So did my convulsions. My mind instantly cleared, and never before had I felt such joy. I turned to my left just in time to see what I previously thought to be a corpse lunge forward and wrap its arms around Father Bernard's chest, pulling him towards the wall. The chains confining its limbs groaned with the effort. Had Father Bernard been standing a mere 6 inches further away, he would have been safe from the creature's clutches. And as it stood, he had been positioned within the entity's grab radius, and was now struggling to free himself like an ensnared insect. Father Bernard let out a petrified scream as the corpse-like man sunk its teeth into his neck. Blood poured from his exposed vein like a ruptured waterline, and collected in the folds of his tunic. No matter how hard Father Bernard struggled, his captor's steel-like grip held true. The demon quivered with ecstasy as it slurped down the priest's blood. Who knows how long this experiment from hell had been languishing in the chamber, biding its time for the perfect moment to enact revenge on the man responsible for holding it captive. Based on the level of composition its body had endured, I would say a long time. A long time. Father Bernard let out a final frightened shriek, then went limp in the creature's arms. I watched in suspense as the entity, after taking a few more gulps of blood, proceeded to check his pockets for a key. After a few moments of searching, it found the key and freed itself from the chains that had confined its limbs for a small eternity. It then fled naked from the chamber on its shaking and atrophied legs, leaving me standing there alone as Father Bernard slumped to the ground beside my feet. Procuring the key for myself proved to be quite the challenge, but after a mighty stretch, I was able to grab it from the lock that the creature had left it dangling from. The moment I freed myself from the chains, my heart burst with relief. Only moments ago, I thought that this chamber would be my tomb. That I was now free filled me with such joy that my hands shook. I rubbed at the bruises dotting my wrists and peered down at Father Bernard. If the priest wasn't already dead, he certainly would be soon. Such a massive pool of blood surrounded him that it had to be impossible for him to survive. So after taking a final glance around the chamber, I climbed up the ladder, shaking but relieved, and back into the light. The cool surface of the laptop greeted my hands, causing me to smile for the first time in days. I rummaged through the desk drawers for a few moments and laughed with delight when I found a small slip of paper that contained all of Father Bernard's login information. I powered on the laptop. After a few minutes of searching the computer's hard drive, I located the Apostolic Archive and signed in. Such a wealth of documents populated the screen that my heart started palpitating. Now wasn't the time to peruse them, though. I was still in danger. I needed to return to the safety of my hotel room before a word of Father Bernard's death had spread. Just as I was about to hurry out of the apartment, my mind leapt to a stack of photos I had come across in the desk, and I paused. I'd been so consumed with finding Father Bernard's login information that I'd neglected to look through these photos. Although I knew that I needed to flee from the Vatican Palace while I still had time, my curiosity got the better of me, and I returned to the desk. What I saw turned my stomach. The content of these photos was mundane. They were all just photos of Bernard posing with other priests. But the date turned my blood to ice. 1886. Ever since stealing the laptop, I've been on the run. The church quickly learned of my involvement in Bernard's demise, how, I don't know, and have been hunting me ever since. They'll stop at nothing to re-procure the laptop, a fact which becomes clearer to me day by day. My life is in constant danger now, but I wouldn't have it any other way. The documents in the Apostolic Archive are too important not to share with the public. I'd rather die than let such profound knowledge remain hidden. In short, the laptop I stole from a Catholic priest has access to the Vatican's secret library.
And now, the disclosure begins. So brilliant, brilliant stuff there. So fantastically written. I can't tell you what a difference it makes as somebody reading these out live when the person who has written it writes really well. Everything just flows. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience. Just to be able to read something really well written, just like that was. Fantastic. Please go visit Daily Horror Stories, the YouTube channel of the author of that. Brilliant, brilliant work. And he's reading his own stories as well. And I'm throwing my weight behind him to try and build up his subscriber level and support as quickly as possible. Well worth it. And what else tonight? Oh yeah, very, very big shout out to the one and only Andy J. Very, very good old friend of mine, one of my best friends, who I had the pleasure of reconnecting with after way, way too long. Too long, mate. I'm sorry. Don't know how it happened, but years went by. They're going by so quickly, aren't they? But lovely to chat with you recently, and we will do it again very, very soon. So this one is dedicated to you, my old mate, and your lovely wife Elsa, and your daughter Maddie. We'll speak soon, yeah? To the rest of you, I'll be back again very, very soon. Don't worry about it. I know you love my daily doses of horror, don't you? Back again very soon, but until then, sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time listening to me. Now, if you enjoyed the Dr. Creepen experience, then come find me on Facebook. Come chat with me on Twitter. Listen to the background music and download it if you like on SoundCloud. Drop by the store, pick up a t-shirt. And, importantly, if you've got a story you'd like me to read, send it to Dr. Creepen's Vault, the subreddit I set up so that I could read your stories. Now, looking forward to seeing you all again real soon. So, come check me out, okay?